you. All right, first off, thank you to Coach Mack. Obviously, he was instrumental in me coming up as a strength and conditioning coach, but just instrumental in me developing as a person, me growing in life, so thank you to him. Thank you to CSCCa for putting on another great conference this year. I always love coming to this conference and catching up with a lot of familiar faces. Thank you to First Beat, not just for sponsoring the talk, but for all the support they've provided myself in Eastern Michigan over the last few years, and all the support they provided me when I was at Christopher Newport University. And then thank you to all of you for being here. I know day 3 at 9 a.m. is a tough one to make, so I'm really appreciative of that. Here's been the most recent stops over the last 10 years for me. It's been a lot of moving all over the country, a lot of learning, a lot of growing. And we all could probably agree the field has changed a lot in the last 10 years, but I'm happy to say the reason I became a strength coach is still the reason today. A lot of things remain the same. So before we go forward, I just think it's important for you to see what I'm about. These two photos captured why I coach, from just incredible moments in the weight room, unforgettable moments on the floor. For me, I've fallen in love with the process of preparing our athletes to be at their best when their best is needed, to rise to this occasion so that they are ready for these type of moments. And so every day, this is what I'm about, this is what I'm chasing, this type of energy, this type of passion, just the feeling you get as a coach in these moments, the feeling that athletes have in these moments, that's really what I'm about. That's why I do what I do. And athlete monitoring is a piece of how I do what I do. And my view on athlete monitoring, my evolution with athlete monitoring is continuing to grow. So when I first got in the field, when I first became a strength coach, I thought that being a strength coach and athlete monitoring was two separate things. Like you could either be a strength coach or you could be a sports scientist or be the strength coach on staff that collects data, but I thought it was like kind of two different things. It wasn't until 2013, my first day interning with the Buffalo Bills, that I actually got introduced to formal athlete monitoring. And so first day on the job, Coach Sano grabs me and is like, we're going to sit in a meeting now on GPS. And literally my only frame of reference for GPS at that point was the Garmin that I used to navigate from Springfield, Massachusetts to Buffalo, New York. And so I had no idea what he was talking about. I thought I was going to have to be driving players around, which I actually did. That was part of the internship. But anyway, needless to say, I learned a lot about monitoring. They were bringing in a lot of pieces of technology that year. So I learned about the process, learned about how to implement it and relay information to the coaching staff. But also, being in the NFL, my first view of monitoring, I'm like, you got to have some serious money if you want to do this. Like, it's the NFL. I can't do this elsewhere. But we all know now that, you don't have to break the bank to have successful athlete monitoring systems. Eventually, I started, using some data, but early on in my career, I made the mistake of thinking that just one piece of data or one data set, one variable was going to tell me the full story, and I'd be able to make successful interventions and make changes within the athletes I was working with. But eventually I smartened up. I was like, I need to collect as much data as possible. I need to tell the full story, paint the full picture, pull as much information as I can. But what ended up happening is I ended up sitting on a lot of data. Not all that data became actionable, and really it just created a lot of extra work for myself. Me talking about what I'm about, why I became a strength coach, kind of took away from the things that I like to do a little bit, created a whole bunch more work. But as you can see, where I'm at now, though, I'm just a strength coach. I realize, you can have affordable athlete monitoring. You can collect a lot of data, build big databases, building athlete profiles, and still be a strength coach and not take away from the reason you got in the field, not take away from what you're passionate about. Because what I realize is, data isn't the issue. Our process around data is. Training is monitoring. Strength and conditioning is monitoring. We've always collected data, but the data that we've been collecting, the process around it is fairly straightforward. And so when we try and keep the same processes that we do when we collect our anthropometric measurements, our movement, or our performance testing, the logistics around that just aren't going to apply when we try and take on other stuff. So data is not the issue. We're always going to take anthropometric movements with our athletes. For decades, we've done that. Athletes come in, we're going to get body weight, we're going to get their body composition. You've got a baseline. We want to see if the training program improved their body composition because we think that's going to be increasing their performance. We're going to get some movement evaluation, whether you do a movement screen, whether you just do goniometer, joint angles. You want to get some type of baseline of where their movement is, see if the training is improving their movement, because we think that's going to be linked with reducing risk of injury. And then all of our performance metrics, we're always good at that. We're going to get our baseline testing, see if our training program made our athletes bigger, faster, stronger. And so the data and the process around that is pretty straightforward. My jump into more traditional monitoring, my jump into looking at training load and recovery came when, my first full-time job, I was down at Christopher Newport University. I'm the strength coach for 10 teams. And when I say I'm the strength coach for 10 teams, I mean literally I'll have 10 teams training in a day. And so that's 10 hours out of the day, every hour of the hour I'm on the floor coaching. So the role they wanted me to come in is work a lot with basketball. So I would schedule my day around basketball. I would be at basketball practice. I'd monitor, a lot with the basketball team. But all other 9 teams, my only interaction with them was in the weight room. And so what I learned early on is when you look at like a dose-response relationship, the training load that I'm putting forward in the weight room doesn't necessarily correlate with the readiness state of each athlete when they come in. Like in my own training right now, my readiness state is just predicated on the intensity of my workouts. That's it. If I'm going, heavy mountain dog training, 20 rep squats, whatever I'm after, my readiness is predicated on that, really not a whole lot else. Early on as a strength coach, I realized all my athletes, their readiness was dictated on the practice training load, so many other things. And so I didn't go into this thinking, how can I change what the basketball coach is doing? I'm just thinking, how can I be a better strength coach? How can I individualize the training stimulus within the team setting and just better serve my athletes? How can I figure out where their readiness state is at? So my first thing I wanted to look at is just overall allostatic load, realizing early on that each athlete has a finite stress cup. And the stress I'm pouring in could be the same. I could pour the same stress into an athlete's cup from a weight room standpoint, and it barely fills up the cup. That same stress is going to overflow another athlete's cup. So for me, early on, I'm just like, I need to try and quantify this. I need to manage this stress. I need to better, do a better job being a strength coach and individualizing this stress. So that led me into auto-regulation. And, to me, heart rate training is to conditioning what velocity-based training is to lifting. And what I mean by that is with velocity-based training, we could really quickly gauge the readiness state of our athletes. And when we monitor heart rate, we can do the same thing, looking at resting heart rate, HRV, whatever. We can quickly gauge that readiness state. But more importantly, velocity-based training, velocity and heart rate is naturally occurring. Whether we quantify it or not, bar speed's happening. But when we quantify it, we have better insights into what the adaptations are that we're getting from our athletes. Same thing with heart rate. Heart rate's naturally occurring. It's responding to the stress of conditioning. But when we quantify what's going on with the heart, now we'll have better insights into what the training effects are and what the adaptations are. So for me, I could be trying to do just a very general aerobic capacity, aerobic base workout, but a certain athlete could be responding very anaerobically to it, and we could have different adaptations. So why not just quantify what's going on, see what's going on, make a better evaluation? So first, everyone says before you dive into anything, start with questions, identify the problem. So for me, the problem was I need to figure out what the allostatic load is of these athletes. I need to quantify training loads and readiness just to be a better strength coach so I have more information so I can change up their training program. And like I said, before you dive into starting to collect data, you got to create a process. But even before you create a process, you got to ask yourselves these questions. If you overlook these questions, you're going to set yourself up for failure. So for me, it's just, first thing, can we get clean data? If we're not getting, clean, valid data, then there's really no point in collecting it. We're going to be making assumptions off the wrong type of measurements. Consistent data is really important. Like I said, if we're just getting one variable every now and again, to me, that's not telling the full story. There's going to be a lot of holes in it. So I want clean, consistent data that I can get all the time. And then we got to see what resources do we have and what are our logistics. Resources meaning who's going to be involved with the data? How much is the coaching staff going to be involved? How much is your sports medicine staff? Resources for me when I was at CNU was who could pay for this stuff because we didn't have the budget to do it. So we had to figure out what our resources was to get a little bit of money towards it. But then logistics is the biggest thing. Like I said, the logistics of collecting data from a basic strength and conditioning standpoint, fairly straightforward. But once we start adding in, readiness, training load, whatever type of measurement you want, the logistics change. So like for me, if we're tracking heart rate, if we practice at 1 o'clock, I got to make sure by 12:30 all the heart rate belts are hanging at each athlete's locker. So if I got another training group, if I got to be in a meeting, if for whatever reason I can't allocate that time of the day to get that set up, I need to know what the resources are, what the logistics are. Do we have an intern, a GA, an athletic trainer, a manager? Is someone able to fulfill that role so now there's not a drop-off in data because then we're still not getting consistent data? So having a contingency plan, setting all this up is going to create a process. So for me, the process comes down to these 4 things. Very first thing, collect. What are we going to collect? How are we going to collect it? What are the logistics around it? Then let's see what happens. We got to review the data before we start changing up things. So let's review everything that we're seeing. Then let's report it. Let's communicate it to all the appropriate parties. And then the last thing is recalibrate. That's our intervention. That's what we're going to change. And for me, I just call it recalibrate because as coaches, we got our coach's eye, we got our intuition, we got our plans. Like, we should know where we're going. All the data is going to do is, are we hitting the target? Are we slightly off? Do we need to recalibrate? It's not going to change everything that we're doing. But again, I think a lot of people automatically are like, we're going to collect, we're going to start changing right away. You got to follow the process. Sit back, see what's going on, then we can make our changes. So what do we collect? Well, we're going to collect objective and subjective measures. So we're looking at objective readiness and training load, subjective readiness and training load. So for me, I want to get both measures to give the data much more context. We can paint the biggest picture, tell the biggest story, and make sure we're making the right interventions with all of our athletes. So the first and most simple thing that we do is a subjective wellness questionnaire. So I text this out to the athletes every single day via Google Forms, and it's a 10-question questionnaire, answering 1 to 5 on there. Now, when I was at CNU, we had Team Builder. Team Builder did this for the guys, made my life so much easier. All right, at Eastern, weren't able to spend a lot of extra money, so had to build it in Google Forms, but got the job done. Guys come in, and now we're going to look at what's going on in their life, but also how they're responding to it, how they're feeling on a given day. Sleep, nutrition, hydration, mood, stress, fatigue, muscle soreness, and then pain identification, just seeing anywhere that got banged up is going to be pretty important, communicating to our athletic trainer. So we're looking at subjective readiness, but then we're also going to look at objective readiness as well. So the guys come in, they're sitting at the chairs, they fill out the 10-question questionnaire, takes less than a minute. Heart rate belts are already hanging on their lockers. They're going to put the heart rate belt on, and now the logistics around our quick recovery test, or HRV, is different with every team that I work with. With men's basketball, I got 3 minutes before we start film at 1 o'clock where we can knock out our QRT. So with First Beat, we're able to look at HRV and quantify, what the objective readiness of the athlete is with a 3-minute test. They're going to lay on the ground. They're just going to focus on the breathing, clear their mind. I just like to call it 3 mindful minutes before the stress of the day kicks in, before we do film for 30 minutes, before we have a 2-hour practice and then a 30-minute lift. We're going to relax for 3 minutes, focus on your breathing, start visualizing what you need to get done for the day, and on the back end, I get some objective, readiness measures on our team and all of our athletes. Now, the data from that, First Beat's going to spit out a quick recovery test percentage. So right away, we're going to see the percent recovered from a team standpoint and each individual. We're also going to see the 7-day average right away. I also like to look at what the resting heart rate is in that 3 minutes, as well as the RMSSD, which is the actual variable for heart rate variability. And the RMSSD and looking at where their HRV is becomes important, because when I start to see downward trends in the subjective wellness questionnaire, when I start to see downward trends in either QRT or chronically low RMSSD, that's when we're going to look at a lifestyle assessment. And now let's actually quantify what's going on outside the weight room, off the court, and how they're handling stress from a day-to-day basis. So this is where the First Beat bodyguard. So again, this isn't part of our day-to-day, but this is something that we build into our system where when guys are trending down, we're going to hook up the bodyguard to them, which non-invasive, real lightweight, tracks heart rates, accelerometer as well. And we're going to look at how they're responding to stress throughout the day. So the first variable is a 24-hour stress recovery balance. What this is going to show is, when we're all got stress in our day, right? And athletes, when they're in class, high-intensity class, they're going to have stress. We're not trying to avoid stress. But if the last 2 hours of the day, when they think they're relaxing before they go to bed, and they think they're shifting that parasympathetic state, this is going to show us that, if they're playing Call of Duty or whatever they're doing is too stressful, they might be burning red all the way into the night. And now, on the back end, we get overnight recovery, and we might have some deviations in what their overnight recovery score is. So we're quantifying sleep with this bodyguard as well, which is real important. So we subjectively look at, how many hours of sleep did you get? Did you feel like it was restful? But now we get hard data to see, is the sleep actually restful for these athletes? Which becomes important because we know sleep is going to be the biggest modality of recovery that we got. So we want to make sure that we're setting up interventions that are going to promote restful sleep. And then the last bit of readiness data that we do, 1 to 2 times per week, we're going to look at a counter movement jump on a just jump mat. And with this, we're going to do 3 different jumps. To do the counter movement jump, non-counter movement, and drop jump. With the Z-score, and from a readiness standpoint, we're going to look at variation in the counter movement jump as kind of our readiness metric. But just from a programming standpoint, doing this 1 to 2 times per week, we're also going to see, is there a big drop-off in what the drop jump and the counter movement jump is compared to the non-counter movement jump? Do we have real super elastic athletes and their non-counter movement jump is super low? We need to do more strength work with them. With basketball, there's a lot of guys where that's what we're looking at, but some of our big guys, it's the opposite. Some of our post players, their non-counter movement jump is close to or slightly higher than their counter movement jump. So they got great base level strength already. Now we need to get some light level plyometrics and more elastic work with those guys. So with these 1 to 2 times per week, we're going to do 3 jumps each, and then I'm going to take the average of the 3, and that's what I'm looking at from a variation standpoint. So just like we looked at, all of our subjective and objective readiness, now we're going to look at subjective and objective training load. So the first thing, just like I text out a subjective wellness questionnaire, soon as practice is done, the guys get back to the locker room, I text them out a session RPE. 1 question, how difficult was practice today on a scale of 1 to 10? They fill that out, I multiply it by the duration of practice, and now I'm able to get a subjective training load for our athletes. What I changed this year is I text one out to the athletes, then I'm going to text one out to the coaching staff as well. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to educate our coaching staff on what practice is, what are the expected training loads, are we getting the results that we expected? So the coaching staff, I'm just trying to get them to understand that whether we quantify it or not, basketball is a stress. They are applying a significant training load on the athlete. So I'm not telling them how to do their job, but I got a good enough relationship with them now where we're starting to educate them on what the training loads are. Are we getting the expected results we got? Is it matching up with what's actually happening with our athletes? And now the heart rate belts, again, stay on the athletes during practice, and so now I can finally quantify practice, quantify the training loads of our basketball practice. And so with First Beat, we look at 4 main metrics. There's a ton of different variables you could look at, but I break it down to 4 main metrics. First thing is just the training effect. On a scale of 0 to 5, what's the intensity of the session? What are the adaptations we're expecting? What percentage anaerobic versus aerobic is that session? And then TRIMP, which is training impulse, that is just what is our objective internal load. What's the training load, TRIMP? All right, what is our training load? We look at that from a team standpoint. What's the team TRIMP? We look at it from an individual standpoint, and then we can even break it down, TRIMP per minute, and look at that intensity and the rate of loading. Calories is going to be a big one with us, with basketball in particular, but with our guys, we play a 2-3 zone. We recruit a lot of tall, long, skinny, lanky guys, a lot of guys coming in underweight, and so early on in our program, guys need to gain a significant amount of weight. And so we're looking at how many calories they're burning in practice, burning in games. We match that up with what we're doing from a nutrition standpoint to make sure that we are maintaining our weight. I've been here for 3 years. My first season, on average, guys lost between 8 to 10 pounds during the course of the year. So the last 2 years, now we start tracking calories burnt, matching up with nutrition. We've been able to overcome that, but the calories is going to be an important one for us. And then finally, heart rate zones, time spent in specific heart rate zones. That's just going to allow me as a strength coach to better program and better prepare our athletes. So looking at scrimmage data, looking at game data, time spent in above 80%, time spent above 90%. Now I know how to kind of adjust some of what we're doing from a conditioning standpoint. So talking training load, we could talk external training load, we could talk internal training load. External training load just quantifies the work done. A lot of it is more biomechanics based. Speed, acceleration, distances. Everything I've been saying is internal. It's how they are responding to the work that got done. Now, like I said, I want to paint the biggest picture possible. So ideally, you want to have both. You want to see the external training load. You want to see the internal training load, see how they're working with each other. Right now, we aren't quantifying external training load with any wearables, but what we are doing to try and kind of move forward is, what's the work that got done? Okay, what was the practice today? How are athletes responding to what we did in practice? What are the drills we had in practice? And start modeling it out that way. So now we know the drills that are going to make up more of our high-intensity practices, the drills that make up more of our low-intensity practices. And so this is me and the coaching staff sitting there trying to model forward. What did we get done? How did the athletes respond to it? What's a normal response to what we're seeing? So everything I just talked about, it's a daily process. Make it daily, make it easy. It's, not another stressor for the athletes. It's just a part of what they're doing during the day. They come in the locker room. I text them out the Google form. They fill out their SWQ. Heart rate belt hanging on the lockers for them already. They put the heart rate belt on. We got our 3 mindful minutes before we go into film. Right after film, we're on the court for practice. We're tracking training load of practice. As soon as practice is done, we go in the weight room. We'll have a 30-minute lift. As soon as the lift is done, now we're back in the locker room. Text out the guys the session RPE. They fill out the session RPE. They leave the heart rate belt on the locker. As soon as the day is done, I come through the locker room, collect all the belts. I'm going to wash the belts, break down the heart rate strap, give it to our equipment staff. They throw it through the washers. Day starts over the next day. So, this is just, invisible to the athletes. It's making it, part of the training process. It's just part of our schedule. So our monitoring schedule, everything I talked about, subjective and objective readiness and training load, we're getting that almost every single day. And then some of our other measures are once or twice a week, counter movement, jump, body weight, etc. And those got to be part of the training process as well. We build them in right into our lift. So even though basketball is a small team, even though, it's still just me on the floor with them. I don't have an assistant, or during the season I don't have an intern. It's me with 15 guys. Even though it's a small team, I don't want to be sitting there typing in data, working in Excel. I want to do what I'm about. I want to be coaching. I want to be present. I want to be on the floor with them. So our body weight and our jump data gets built right into the training program. Guys will come in. They'll see they got to weigh in. Computer set up right next to the scale. They're going to enter their weight. Jump data is paired with one of our exercises. Guys work in groups of 2. One guy's jumping. The other guy's recording the height on the computer, and then they switch. And yes, this takes some trust, some accountability, and a built-in culture with your athletes, which we've had, developed over 3 years. And if you can't trust your athletes to enter the right data, then really none of this stuff matters, and you got to scale it back a little bit. But after 3 years, we've been building it up. So that's everything we collected. That's the logistics of collecting. Now let's pull it all together and review. So I talked a lot about our subjective measures. I talked a lot about our objective measures. For me, we need to get them together so they can all communicate and I can see them all in one place. Now, if we're just looking at First Beat data, First Beat's cloud and their dashboard is phenomenal. So you can you can see what's going on, and you don't got to interpret what the numbers mean. It's all color-coded. So if you're looking at First Beat alone, their dashboard is fine. But like I said, I want to get as much data as possible, so I want to get it all together. And again, if you have any type of athlete management system, they'll be able to do this for you. They'll pull it all together. We didn't have the money for it, so I had to build it all out in Excel. This just takes 2 minutes out of my day. Our Google form data gets linked to a Google Sheet. I export the Google Sheet into Excel. Our First Beat data goes into the cloud. I export it into Excel, transfer it over to my Excel workbook. And just being transparent here, I think a lot of people talk about, oh yeah, I throw stuff in Excel and I look at it. And for me, I'm not an Excel whiz. I've watched hours of Excel videos. I know enough to be dangerous right now, but I just want to throw up how I got the dashboard working initially. Now, I don't know if this is the easiest way to do it. I don't know if this is a roundabout way to do it. All I know is this got my dashboard working, and I'm able to get everything up and running together. So just for the younger guys, I want to kind of cut some time off where this is how I got it working. For all the older Excel whizzes, I'm putting this up so afterwards you could be like, yeah, you could cut this step out, you could do this, we can chop it up. But the way I got all my data is I have a different sheet for everything I'm looking at. A sheet for subjective readiness, a sheet for objective readiness, a sheet for subjective training load, objective training load, and so on. First thing I do is I make sure the name is formatted correctly on all different sheets. And then we got to convert our timestamp to a date. So our Google Forms, get sent out a timestamp. As soon as the guy filled it out, it's attached with a date and a time. Same thing with our first beat data. We got to strip the date or the time from our date. So this saved me hours on a MacBook. I don't know what it is if you don't got a Mac. I apologize. But on a MacBook, if you hit Control F, you highlight the column, you hit Control F, replace all, you do a space plus an asterisk, and that strips the timestamp and leaves you just with a date. You reformat the date. Now, all of a sudden, you got all your names are formatted the same, all your days are formatted the same. And then before you put any functions, I think it's important you set up another column and you go equals weekday with the date. And what that's going to do is it's going to give a numeric value to all your days. So Sundays will be 1, Mondays will be 2, and so on. That becomes important when we start looking at filters and we want to see what Sunday's data look like compared to Thursday's data, and so on. And then the way I built it out from there is just simple, VLOOKUPs, index match functions, tables, filters, pivot tables. There's a lot of different stuff you can do. What I relied heavily on, which I don't know if it's the right way or not, but it's how I built the dashboard, is the index match three-way lookup. Three-way lookup meaning every single sheet, it's going to match name, date, that variable from that sheet. Name, date, that variable from that sheet. It's all going to pull it together. So now we got to review the data. We got to do two things. Let's give our data context for what we're seeing from team averages, group averages, individual norms, and then we can start to see trends, acute to chronic, acute versus longitudinal data. How is our subjective and objective measures interacting? And then my favorite piece that we added this year, let's compare our physiological data with our game data. So from a team standpoint, here's some averages for team training load. This is in conference play. Here's our trimp values throughout the week for our team. Now, these values are going to depend on your personnel. It's going to depend on the way your coaches run practice. It's going to depend on high versus low minute guys, all this kind of stuff. But these are our norms for conference play. We play on Tuesdays and Saturdays. So Tuesday, Saturday is our game. Our high minute guys are getting up around 200 trimp. Now, the way we play, we really only play about 8 guys. Everyone else is barely playing. Our high minute guys, about 8 guys, 32 to 40 minutes a game. Everyone else is either not playing or only getting a couple minutes. So our week is going to start off on Sunday. Sunday is going to be our lightest day of the week. We're only hitting about 50. We're coming off of a game, but we got to prepare for Tuesday's game. So we're going to get just a very low-level stimulus, kind of walk through, just try and promote some recovery. Monday, we're going to ramp it up a little bit, but we're not going to hit our normal practice values because we got to play the next day. Wednesday's our off day. Thursday's going to be our most intensive practice of the week because we come off an off day. We got to review Tuesday's game. We got to prepare for Saturday's game. We're going to have our longest practice of the week. Now we're going to scale it down a bit on Friday, but we still got to get work done. We still got to prepare. We don't want to scale it too much, but we want to have a positive effect going into Saturday's game. Recovery, just the same way we look at training load, we got to look at recovery and put some norms and context around what we're seeing. So just like I showed you our training load for conference play, this is sample recovery from preseason. Now, preseason recovery is going to be different than off-season recovery. So preseason here, we've got 42 days to get in 30 practices. And when I talk about a dose-response relationship, we need to make sure the guys are prepared to handle those 30 practices, but the training load that we're applying in those 30 days is going to should be directly correlated with what the recovery is if they're prepared for it, right? We're not playing any games. It's just practice. The practice, and they should be recovered. So we want to make sure it's kind of undulating a little bit higher. We're not seeing any steep drops in team recovery. That's contrast to what our off-season looks like. In our off-season, we have the highest stresses in the weight room, so I'm expecting there to be a drop in team recovery. That's what I'm expecting. I want to see that adaptation. I'm promoting adaptations. I'm not trying to blunt that process. So in the off-season, we're making sure they're prepared for the stress of preseason here. Preseason recovery should be fairly normal, but now it's going to be also opposite and in contrast to what we see in non-conference schedule versus conference schedule. Conference schedule is just a crapshoot. Like you know what I mean? We got 3 games in a week sometimes. Sometimes we got to be on a bus at 4:30 in the morning to catch a 6 a.m. flight. So recovery is going to be variable. It's going to be all over the place. But that's also in contrast to once we get into our conference season where games are just Tuesday, Saturday. It's very consistent like I showed you with our training loads. So you got to put everything into context from a team standpoint. More than the team, though, we need to break it down to what are specific groups and what are the differences and variations in our groups. Groups could be looked at by playing time or by position. So on the top right graph there, we're breaking down practice trim numbers for guards versus bigs. So what this is showing us is even though it's a team practice, we still break off into individual groups, and our bigs practice is much more stressful. They have a higher trim value than our guards. So instead of just looking at what the team average is, we need to know the difference in the positions, because as a strength coach, if I'm trying to lift them post-practice, I need to know that the bigs are probably a little bit more burnt than our guards. Maybe I want to lift them pre-practice. You know, you got to take all this into consideration. Now, playing time and training load is going to be extremely important as well. Like I said, we only play about 8 guys. 8 guys are getting 32, 35, 40 minutes a game. The other 8 guys are maybe not getting any training load on that day. So if you go back to what our trim numbers were for conference play, you'll see in a 7-day week, 1 day is mandatory off. We got 2 games. If they're not playing, if half our team isn't playing in those 2 games, now we're missing 1/3 of our training load exposure. So when we talk acute and chronic workloads and high versus low minute, we can't model everything off of just our high minute guys. We got to take into consideration what the low minute guys are doing and making sure we're doing something to increase the training load on the days where they aren't there. Same thing with recovery. When we got high minute guys versus low minute guys, if we got 8 guys that are playing 30 plus minutes and we got 8 guys that are just a couple minutes or not even hitting the floor, we're probably expecting recovery to be a little bit different. So sometimes it's not good to look at the team averages. Most important thing is looking at individual averages. We must account for individual variance. So what we do with most of our variables is we apply a z-score to them. That way we can normalize our data with all the individuals. So if we're talking counter movement jump data, instead of me jumping 25 inches and another guy 15, a 1-inch decrease is going to be significantly different for both of them. Right, so we apply a z-score so that it's a little bit more weighted and normalized. On this graph, we got our subjective wellness questionnaire. We got a sample from athlete 1 in blue, pretty much reporting most of the same stuff, kind of stays right around the same area. Athlete 2 is highly variant and is all over the place. Based on our stoplight approach with the z-score, green, yellow, red, it's going to be weighted differently so that when we do see a drop-off in athlete 1, it's going to be weighted a little bit more. And some people ask me, with athlete 1, if they're reporting most of the same stuff every day, do you care about that? And as long as it's true, no, I don't care. Because then, like I said, once we do see a drop, now it's going to be much more significant. So all of that then gets pumped into athlete profile in Excel, taking it back to like our main metrics as a strength coach. Right in front of me, I'll see what this guy's anthropometric measurements are, his movement measurements, his performance measurements, and then everything we're talking about today, readiness, training load, all our subject and objective comes right into one workbook. Stoplight approach, green, yellow, red, real quick. We can highlight if there's anything that we need to pay particular attention to. And so this is, myself within the coaching staff and athletic training staff that we're sharing this with. So now we can look at trends. Now we normalize all our data, we can look at trends. So acute to chronic workload or acute versus longitudinal data is a big thing that we need to look at. When we talk acute to chronic workload, if we're just using first beats heart rate metrics in their dashboard, they pump all this stuff out for you. They calculate acute to chronic workload for you from a team standpoint and from an individual standpoint. So it makes my job really simple. Now, all the literature is saying acute and chronic workload. Too fast of an increase in workload, too fast of a decrease in workload is going to leave the athlete more susceptible to injury. So there's a sweet spot between 0.8 and 1.3 that we try and stay in. We view this, but I think the overall message, everything I'm saying today is between myself and teaching our coaching staff to be cognizant of this fact, cognizant of the training loads that we are inducing and how athletes are responding to it. So acute workload, what's the work that we're getting done this week? Chronic workload, what's the average of the last 3 weeks? Are they matching up? We try and stay between 0.8 and 1.3. And then acute versus longitudinal, right? Acute meaning if we see something on a given day, do we make a change or do we step back and see where we're trending and kind of stay the course? So here's some counter movement jump data from one of our athletes during conference play. So this athlete increased his vertical jump 2.25 inches during that time period. But even though we trended in the right direction, even though he was at his best and peaking at the end of the year when we needed him, there's still going to be moments in there where we could step in and say, hey, do we need acute intervention? They're going to be present. Now, for me, I don't make any one change off just one number or one variable. That's why I take in all of the different data that I'm looking at to see what's going on. But even more than that is just that's supposed to drive communication with the athlete. So in these particular instances, when there's only a couple moments where there might be acute intervention, we might just be letting it ride in training. Unless the athlete's coming to me and saying, hey, I heard, I'm feeling this, that, then we might make an adjustment. But there's only a couple moments where, when we're trending in the right direction, where we might need acute intervention. When we're trending in the wrong direction, we're probably going to see more opportunities for us to step in. So counter movement jump, same time period. Here's a separate athlete where he was trending in the wrong direction, and you see after the second one, definitely the third one, we know something's going on and we're probably going to need to step in and make some adjustments here. All right, now putting context around everything. Why would one athlete be trending in the right direction? Why would one athlete be trending in the wrong direction? This particular instance, let's just start looking at some main variables that might affect vertical jump. First athlete, body weight. All during the season, he kind of undulated right around 210 where we needed him. That's perfect because, like I said, my first year, a lot of guys were losing body weight. This guy is maintaining his body weight. He's increasing his vertical jump. That's perfect. That's what we're looking for. Now, the guy that had a downward trend in his counter movement jump, here was his trend in body weight. Gained a significant amount of weight late in the year. And so when you're gaining just fat mass, when you're gaining weight you shouldn't be gaining, you probably are going to see a performance decrement in a vertical jump or any of our performance testing metrics. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on this particular instance of this situation. I just use this to highlight the fact that it's important to have as much variables as possible, put as much context to the situation. That way when you start to analyze your data, you don't misinterpret and think, okay, what did my training program do wrong? It worked because of this reason. It didn't work because of this reason. Put as much context around the situation. Now let's look at how do our objective and our subjective measures interact with each other. And so from a training load standpoint, for most athletes, if we look at session RPE and their trim, they're going to trend together pretty nicely. That's fairly consistent. But this makes sense to me because we educate our athletes on how to do the session RPE, how intense the practice was, and all we're seeing then is the heart rate metrics validated that. They're saying, yeah, it felt like it was, this, and the heart rate saying, yeah, it was that, and they're not off at all. To me, that makes sense. It's a very controlled situation. But that is in contrast to what we see from our recovery data with most of our athletes. Recovery data for us is a little bit noisier. So here's that athlete with the subjective wellness questionnaire that was highly variant, and then we look at their QRT data, and highly variant as well. Now, late in the month, we can see it starts to trend together slightly, but it's pretty noisy. If you look at our athlete that was more consistent with their subjective wellness questionnaire, we could see that doesn't trend with the QRT as well. But when we look at QRT, both of those kind of follow the same trend line. But to me, because it's more noisy, that's why we look at both of them. That's why we need subjective measure. That's why we take an objective measure, put as much context around the situation as possible. And so this one is real cool to me. This is what it's all about for me. This year, this is Brad, one of our GAs. He's an analytics guy, pulls all of our game data. Now we're trying to set the athletes up to be in the best physiological state possible, but let's see what it actually correlates with being on the floor. So here we're going to look at our Friday's practice, the trimp on our Friday's practice, how it correlates with actual game day performance on a Saturday. And so this is data from one of our players that we need him to play well for us to win. And going back to my trimp weekly outline, you saw on Friday, trimp was at 75. Well, where did that number come from? Came from some trial and error, right? Throughout the year, sometimes coach would be like, all right, we're going to take off on Friday, or we're going to have a real light day on Friday. And what I started noticing out of this athlete is the more rest he got, the worse he was on Saturday, the longer it took him to start his engine and all that. When we were really cruising, he was going on Saturday. So what we looked at here is, what was the trimp on Friday? How did his game day performance look on Saturday? So on game 1, took the day off on Friday. Going into Saturday's game, his plus-minus was -15. His rebounds was 2. Rebounds was the key stat that we needed him to perform to help us have a successful outcome. Plus-minus is just a basketball stat saying, does this individual affect the team outcome? For the total amount of minutes that I'm on the floor, if the other team outscored us by 5, I got a -5. If we outscored the other team by 5, I got a +5. So this guy, we took off Friday. Saturday's game, -15 plus-minus, only 2 rebounds. Next 2 games, real low-intensity practice, 30 on the trimp and 45 on the trimp. Plus-minus, a little bit better, but still in the negative. Rebounds, slightly better. But then once we got right around that 75 on our practice, when he had a 70, a 75, or an 80 trim on Friday, in Saturday, now he's positive in the plus-minus, and he's getting a significant amount of rebounds, which is helping contribute to us having a win. So this is the type of data I break down with our staff, where we're actually now starting to model out our week and see what's best for our team. So we analyzed all of our data. Now, who are we reporting it to? Well, we're going to report it to coaching staff, sports med, and to our athletes. All 3 of these parties are going to play a significant role in training load and recovery. Coaching staff obviously inducing the most training loads from practice and controlling playing time, which is going to inherently, increase training loads. Sports med plays a big role in what our recovery modalities are, and then obviously it's affecting the athletes, and the athletes have a big responsibility to handle business in the 20 hours that they're out of the facility for the day to make sure they're recovering properly. So reporting to the coaching staff, level 1, phase 1, the very first thing is trying to open that communication and teach them what the training loads are that they're imposing. So we go back to our athlete session RP versus coach session RP. Are we getting the results we expected? Are they matching up? Now, from what I've seen and what I would argue for most of the year, coaches are going to say practice was much lighter than what the athletes said practice was. I started taking this data in preseason, and I found the opposite, and it made sense to me. The coaches thought practice was really difficult. The athletes thought it was extremely light. Now, this became a big issue because what it's telling me is our whole off season, we're preparing the athletes to handle the demands of preseason. We increase their level of preparedness, handle a lot of high stress. We start going on the court for the first time as a team, and the coaching staff didn't take that in consideration, and everything was too light for the athletes. And so now we're 2 weeks into preseason. And again, I handle all the conditioning in the offseason. Basketball staff handles conditioning in the preseason. Once we start games, it's a team effort. For 2 weeks here, the coaching staff, after 2 weeks, looks at me and is like, I don't feel like the guys are getting in any better shape than in week 1. And then I'm showing them this. I'm like, yeah, well, they've been cruising for 2 weeks. It's been like super light. So now we know we can actually start ramping it up because, again, acute chronic workload, the chronic workloads were significantly higher. We don't got to drop off. When we're talking subjective or athlete session RPE, a subjective training load, remember, that matches up with what the athlete's trim value was. So that is what the physiological metrics and the adaptation they're getting. So first 2 weeks, the guys loved it. It was real easy, a lot of teaching, a lot of standing around. We were able to start to increase what we did in practice. But then now we've educated the coaching staff on that so that in conference play and late in the year, where the coaches are thinking it's super light and the athletes are thinking it's super heavy, that we've been able to normalize that and we're better serving our athletes. So again, with the coaching staff, here's more data I would show them. This is off-season conditioning data. So with a subjective RPE, subjective training load, I'm showing them how athletes are responding to training loads. Now let's objectively show them how athletes are responding to training loads. This is just sample off-season conditioning, coaches out watching the conditioning session, and I'm showing them like, all right, yeah, athlete A, you seeing this guy's in shape, he's handling the stress really well, in contrast to one of our other guys that was really struggling. You saw that, right? Okay, look at here, now you can see the difference. Here's what this athlete looked like, here's what this athlete looked like. Look at the difference in trim values. And so coaches start now understand the physiological ramifications of that. Then you're also going to show them what the progress that these athletes make. So that same athlete on week 1 that was really struggling. Now I'm going to show him, hey, after our 8-week off season, let's look at that warm-up in the beginning. See how he's handling the stress, the warm-up much better. Look at once we did our conditioning, handled that. But the big thing is, look at that heart rate tanked in our 3-minute recovery, where week 1, he wasn't able to drop his heart rate at all. All right, so showing coach the adaptations, and now he's starting to understand, yeah, he looks like he's in better shape. I see all of this, but now you're, showing him the actual data with it. And then I sit in on all the coaching staff meetings. This is stuff that coach likes me to give him. During our practices, when we do conditioning, he might challenge the guys, or he likes doing what's called a 3-minute drill sometimes in practice, just literally 3 minutes up and down the court as many times as you can. From some of our heart rate stuff, we've seen that when guys are on the floor, for majority of the time, they're going to be above 80% max heart rate, and they got to be able to perform at that. So a lot of times what coach wants is in conditioning, he wants them to get up above 80% and maintain it, get used to working at that stress. So I might just show him, he told the guys, we're going to do a 3-minute drill, we're going to keep going practice, and in practice, we're going to do a 3-minute drill. I need you above 90%. I need you going 100 miles an hour and maintain that and try and beat that score. And so right, wrong, or indifferent, I'll show him the data, be like, yeah, okay, this guy was able to do it. This guy, yeah, he did what you wanted at the beginning of practice, but once he was under fatigue at the end of practice, kind of, once he got a little uncomfortable, didn't hit that second gear where the other guy could. And coach, again, thinks this is good data for him, because late in the game, if we need to stop, he needs to know who he could count on. And so if he enjoys this type of data, and it's opened up more doors for me than more harmful doors. So we're moving along with teaching him about training loads and the response. Sports med, all of this is driven by daily interaction, daily face-to-face communication with our athletic trainer, Brad. Now, I'm fortunate. He has full access to our first beat stuff. He gets the training report sent to them. He can dive into the cloud. All that means is me and him could have really in-depth conversations around what we're seeing from our first beat analytics. He also has access to our subjective questionnaires. And so when I could sit back and I could see the athletes filling out the subjective wellness questionnaire on any given day, it might pop up in that question number 10, any pain identification, anything sore. Someone might say, yeah, I banged up my knee in practice, my low back's hurting. I'll go to Brad and be like, yeah, did you know that this guy's back is hurting? He's like, I had no idea. He hasn't been coming for treatments. And so now everybody's on the same page. We're holding athletes accountable. We're making sure we're addressing any issues. And then with the athletes, we need to make sure that we are communicating stuff to the athletes. All the data for the athletes needs to drive more conversations, more personal interactions. So from a recovery standpoint, just talking to the guys as they come in the building. What's up? How you feeling today? We should be doing that every day automatically, but when we have subjective wellness questionnaire data and we see something different, or when we see a downward trend in the QRT, now when we have that normal interaction and you can actually be like, hey man, I noticed academic load got a bit higher, what's going on there? Or sleep's been bad, what's going on? When you can pull the actual data and show them that you're using it to benefit them, that's when you're going to get the most buy-in. From a training load standpoint, just like the coaches and teaching them, athletes are most visible around our heart rate data during our off season, where some of our protocols, we might shift from going time-based to going heart rate-based. So now whether we're on the turf or the track or on the court, they're going to see on a monitor computer, okay, yeah, here's your heart rate. Until you hit this heart rate zone, don't start your next sprint. And so now they're starting to see how they're feeling, seeing how they're responding to it. It's creating awareness. And after a few years in the program, now guys want the heart rate first beat stuff being automated to them. As soon as the session's over, the reports get emailed to them. It'll show them, they'll be like, yeah, I thought this was like a 3.5. I thought shrimp was about 100 today. And again, the big one that these guys love is just calories. They want to know how many calories they burnt. They want to know if they need to get that extra meal in or not. So we talked about what we collected, talked about how we reviewed all of it, who we reported to. Now it becomes, the final thing that everyone wants to talk about is what are our interventions? How are we recalibrating? Are we hitting our mark? What are we going to change? So we follow a funnel approach here before any intervention. And again, to me, the most important thing is no matter where we're at on this, communication, face-to-face interaction with anything that we see is going to drive the intervention more than just any single number. So we start with training load. Again, we know what the training load should be for the athletes. We know where we're at in the given year. So if the training load isn't matching up with what we think it should be, then that's our first red flag. From there, we're going to look at our objective readiness data. We'll see how the athletes are responding. And then finally, subjective wellness questionnaire putting all the context behind everything to see if we need to make any adjustments. So what are we going to change? Well, that depends on what we control. So for most of us, hopefully, we got full control over our strength program, and we'll be able to make any necessary adjustments to that strength program. For a lot of us, we're not going to have any say in what goes on the basketball side of things. But again, I didn't get in this to tell basketball coaches what to do, but where I'm at in my situation, I know I can make adjustments from a strength standpoint, and I know we're breaking ground and building communication with the basketball staff where we're starting to build out how we're loading them from a practice standpoint. From a weight room standpoint, a couple different things we can do. Where I'm at now, coaching is teaching, and I want athletes to have complete ownership over this. So in years past where the stop-led approach, green, yellow, red, I might start telling athletes, hey, we're reducing volume or intensity today. Now, again, conversation-driven. I want athletes to be aware of what's going on, how their bodies are responding, and what's best for them, and them to start leading the conversation. So a couple things we can do. They'll tell me, yeah, I can hit that weight, but I got to take off a set or something. Or you know what, I'm not really, let's just lower the intensity today. Or maybe we're just going to change the modality. Lower the stress from going from bilateral squat to unilateral. But I want them to be the ones to kind of know their body. And again, year 3 with the program, we're seeing them kind of take that ownership. But then they also might tell me, I'm really hurting. We need to go off the script. We're not going to do what was planned for that day. We're just going to do a recovery lift. We're going to do something that is going to, hopefully accelerate the recovery process. Or if they're super burnt, we're just going to, completely take the day off, do light yoga, foam rolling, stretching, just no training load for the day, do a recovery day. From a basketball standpoint, do we do more interventions or do we do better prescriptions? Now, yes, we'll do interventions. With all of our data, me and our athletic trainer might say, yeah, if you want this guy to play on Saturday, we need to adjust what he's doing Thursday and Friday and modify that. But I'm not sitting here looking at the data and pulling guys left and right. Like, that's not what I'm doing. What we're really doing is just better training load prescription, getting the coaching staff to understand, here is how we're stressing the athletes, how are they responding. Oh, that week didn't go to plan. These drills aren't really fitting in our low intensity program for the day. Here's how we need to adjust it. And then finally, are the interventions working? So I got 2 stories, 2 similar situations, one from when I was at CNU, one from when I was at Eastern. A lot of times we just give our athletes general prescription, get 8 hours of sleep or whatnot. With First Beat, with our heart rate data, we've been able to see, are those interventions actually working? How are we actually impacting the athletes? I'm running out of time here. I was going to go and show you some of our overnight recovery data. I'm going to save this for another presentation, but overnight recovery data shows us, how the athletes are actually recovering from a sleep standpoint. And the overnight recovery is important to me because that's impacting their overall health. All right, when we can shift them from sympathetic to parasympathetic for a majority of the day, improve their recovery, it's going to improve all these other factors. Like Fergus Conaty said, performance is built up of technical, tactical, physical elements. Health sustains all of that. We got to make sure we're having a holistic model that prepares the athlete for the demands. And whether we quantify it or not, readiness and training load are happening in all of these moments that we want to have. So we need to be cognizant of that. We need to be aware that we might as well do our due diligence, objectively quantify readiness and training load so we can have more of these special moments that we like to do as strength coaches. So I'm out of time here, guys. Thank you so much. Again, thank you to First Beat. Thank you to CSCCa. Big thank you to all the coaches that I had the opportunity to work for, and special thank you to all the athletes that I had the privilege to work with. We're out of time for questions. Here is my contact information. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm going to be hanging out in the back. If you want to come up to me, we can talk one-on-one. I'll answer any of your questions. So thank you.